Thank you, Joanne, and good evening, everybody. During the course of my address, I'll try to deal with each of those topics that Joanne articulated. I won't deal with the telecommunications topic because neither Bundeena, Myanmar nor Tarrant Point is in the electorate of Cronulla, so Eleni and or Lee might wish to report on that. I was going to structure my brief remarks in three categories. First, a state overview. Then say something about the environment portfolio and in particular things that might be of interest to people here tonight and small business. And then thirdly, touch on some local issues. While the last week or so has been pretty tumultuous at a federal level, it's very much steady as she goes and putting our best foot forward at the state level. And the best thing we can do as a state government for small, medium or large business is not handouts or specific programs, basically getting the overall economy right and business confidence right. So in the last 7 quarters, in 6 of those quarters, New South Wales has been the fastest growing state in the country. We've had now unemployment at around the lowest level across Australia in terms of percentage. Housing, we've had 61,000 housing approvals in the year to July. That's the largest number of building approvals for 41 years. And for several quarters, the ComSec survey of State of the States has had New South Wales at the top of the 8 states and territories in every quarter. And when we took over in 2011, New South Wales had been the bottom, the very bottom of 8 of those jurisdictions for 4 quarters in a row. It had had the slowest average economic growth of the mainland states for 10 years and the slowest employment growth for 10 years. So we believe that as a state government we have helped to turn New South Wales around in our 4 years, and that's what we intend to keep doing in this year with solid, sensible, steady as she goes government. Of course, the decline of mining has had something to do with it, with Queensland and Western Australia. But New South Wales is still probably comes 3rd in the Commonwealth as a mining state with our coal exports, and yet we've done pretty well compared with other non-mining or lesser mining states like Victoria, Tasmania and South Australia. The state budget is under control, and I think that is part of the business confidence we're trying to instil as well, that we are in control of the state's finances. The 2015-16 budget has seen a surplus of $2.5 billion, and surpluses are predicted for the next 4 years. In every one of our first 4 budgets, we have come in under budget. In other words, we have done better than budgeted in each one of those 4 years. In the 16 years previously, under the previous regime, they overspent every year. In other words, they exceeded their budget every single year for 16 years. So hopefully that fiscal control has been an important part of restoring business confidence in New South Wales. At the small business level, there are a number of long overdue abolitions of taxes which will take place from the 1st of July next year. We'll finally see the end of non-real business asset transfer duty, mortgage duty on business transactions and stamp duty on the transfer of unquoted marketable securities. We have extended our payroll tax rebate scheme, the Jobs Action Plan, for another 4 years to 2019. So anyone paying payroll tax can get a $5,000 rebate on new employees. And this year we've introduced a new scheme where if you don't pay payroll tax, if your payroll threshold is under $750,000, you can now get up to $2,000 as a grant from the state government for any new employees you take on. So although the national economy is probably soft or patchy, the New South Wales economy is pretty clearly now the strongest in the country. On going now to portfolio issues, I became the Minister for the Environment, the Minister for Heritage in April. It is an incredibly diverse portfolio. It's got a spend of $1.7 billion every year, 4,500 employees. I think I've struck the lottery. I wake up every day and think how lucky I am. Wendy Harmer I met last week, and she told me that she would kill for my job. and she told me that every day I have to remember that Peter Garrett gave up Midnight Oil to be the Federal Environment Minister, so I should just count my lucky stars. So look, it is a much happier job than being, say, the Minister for Prisons. Visiting national parks is a much happier thing to do than visiting prisons. On the what's relevant for small business are a number of initiatives. Bin trim. Google, when you go away, Google EPA, Environment Protection Authority, and bin trim, and you'll see a couple of schemes that will hopefully be of interest. Small business can get grants from $2,000 for recycling equipment. We're aiming to increase by the end of the decade the recycling rate by small business from 57% to 70%, so you can get grants for equipment, recycling equipment. If you also Google bin trim, you'll find how you can get free advice on increasing your recycling waste rates, reducing your waste, and that's free of charge as well. So that's bin trim, Google that. Part of our strategy for national parks is increased visitations. Our national park networks covers about 8.5% of the surface area of New South Wales. Part of the social licence of having that large an area locked up is getting people to enjoy our national parks, to have access to our national parks. So we are very keen on increasing visitations. Visitations have increased significantly in the last couple of years, and we want to continue that trend. Among other things we're doing in the area, we've got short stay accommodation. We've opened a couple of cottages in Lee's electorate in the Royal National Park this year for short stay accommodation. We're spending over $1.5 million upgrading the coastal track in the Royal National Park and generally trying to upgrade visitor facilities. We've now got 1,100 kilometres of paths through national parks on Google Maps on Street View. So if an overseas tourist wants to see where he or she can walk through our national parks, they can do that on Street View. And we're developing an app in the next few months for your smartphone with much better maps than we have at the moment for national parks. One of the frequent criticisms I hear are that our signage in national parks leaves a lot to be desired. The maps of national parks and the walking tracks leave a lot to be desired. So we want to improve that, both in the national parks and using information technology. The other national park to talk about, of course, is Kurnell, which touches on what Joe said and plans for 2020. We have spent this year $500,000 upgrading the road out to Cape Solander. We're expecting to upgrade the Cape Bailey track in the next couple of years, and we're looking at the moment at the feasibility of ferry wharves at Kurnell and La Perouse to restore services there. There was a wharf at Kurnell which was washed away by a storm, I think in 1974, and I think 2020 and the 250th anniversary of Captain Cook's Landing is a great segue to leaving some sort of lasting infrastructure at Kurnell. It's not just all about the state government. Every level of government, I think, will be able to contribute to our celebrations or our commemorations in 2020. And since about 2010, Scott Morrison has been convening a 2020 task force which has had representatives of each level of government and the local Kurnell community discussing how we can commemorate 2020. It may be that the local council can look at beautifying Captain Cook Drive. So the national park, I get a lot of comments that Kamei Botany Bay National Park is underwhelming, doesn't reflect what you would expect the birthplace of modern Australia to be. So we're looking at a new plan of management for the Royal National Park, for Kamei Botany Bay National Park. That will lift it up to that standard. And not just on the south side, we're also looking at the La Perouse side as well, the park, of course, straddling both sides. So where all that will land, it's only 5 years away, where all that will land is not finally decided. Upgrades to Captain Cook Drive, for example, will depend upon what happens to the Kurnell Peninsula in the next few years, which in turn will depend upon our sub-regional strategy and the future of the Kurnell Peninsula as it goes through the decline of heavy industry there. I'll come back to that if time permits. And at a federal level, I think Scott is looking at a commemoration involving a replication of the Endeavour sailing up and down the the east coast of Australia. So they're all still ideas in progress. I think the best thing the state government could do, as I say, is an infrastructure legacy involving upgrading the general amenity of Kamay Botany Bay National Park. So I think I've covered environment. The only other environment issue I might mention are marine parks. We are looking in the next couple of years at the possibility of some sort of marine park in the Hawkesbury bioregion, which includes Greater Sydney. By that I don't mean the entirety of the region, but small bits. We get a lot of feedback from divers that having some sanctuary zones will increase tourism. Of course, we've got to get the right balance and not exclude recreational fishers. But that's something that I think we can drive tourism with in the next couple of years as well in my environment portfolio. How am I going? Now, local issues. So the big infrastructure spend at the moment is the hospital system. We are spending about $60 million in the next 2 years upgrading Sutherland Hospital with a new emergency department and a new general ward. That is on track for completion in 2017. About half of that money will be spent in the 2015-16 budget. Roads, there are a number of things to report there. There are a number of pinch points that we're trying to fix in the next year or two that are coming out of the general budget. They include $5 million for the Kingsway down at the Cronulla end, $1 million in central Caringbah, and $5 million to fix up the intersection of Gymea Bay Road and President Avenue. There's a few other things that Eleni may mention as well. The poles and wires. From the proceeds of poles and wires in the next 10 years, we're looking to spend $11 million along the rest of the Kingsway, $11 million along Tarrant Point Road and Rocky Point Road, and we will have a southern extension to WestConnex ready by 2023. That will mean that from around President Avenue, Monterey, you will have freeway conditions basically all the way to the city. So what happens south of Monterey? That's the $64 question, although it's actually not $64, of course, it's many billions of dollars. The F6 study is underway at the moment. As you probably know, we've had this route for 60 years where nothing has happened, apart from the Captain Cook Bridge in 1965. There's been the suggestion in the last 12 months that maybe the F6 could go a different route via Menai, Alfords Point up to Bankstown. The theory being that a lot of the Illawarra traffic would be diverted that way and wants to go to Liverpool or Parramatta rather than to the city, and that if it went through that way, it could still go to the airport along the M5. The economic and traffic modelling of that route and the existing route is still being done. I don't know where it will end up. My hunch is it will follow the existing route because that will deal with not only Illawarra traffic that wants to bypass the Shire, but also with Shire traffic. So without having crunched the numbers myself, my expectation is that something broadly following the current route will be the final route of the F6. Eleni, Lee and I are certainly vigorously lobbying Duncan Gay and RMS for some early decisions on that. Look, one of the things I learned early in my political career was that if you act alone, you are alone. When I found out 2 days after the first budget that the Cronulla Fisheries was going to close, while I had a lot of help from Lee, basically I was on my own, and it's a pretty lonely fight. I've learnt that if you want things done, you're best to do them in numbers. So in the last term of Parliament and this term of Parliament, there is a Southern Sydney caucus of MPs. We had John Flowers in Rockdale, he's now gone, but we've still got Mark Coure in Oatley, the three of us, Melanie Gibbons, the Speaker, Shelley Hancock on the South Coast, Gareth Ward in Kiama, John Ajaka is a local MLC, the Speaker, Don Harwin, lives in Vincentia. So what I've tried to do is organise and it's a Labor Party word, a caucus of Southern Corridor MPs to lobby hard for an F6. And I don't know when, but I'm confident that it will be a lot sooner than a lot of people think. It's not coming out of poles and wires, but if we keep managing our budget as well as we have for the last few years, then I am confident that we will be able to make some definite announcements sooner rather than later. So that's where the F6 is up to. And of course, part of that modelling will be the precise route, the entry and exit ramps, and whether, which I think it is most likely to, whether it will finally connect with that spoke of the West Connects coming south to Monterey. So that will ultimately become stage 1 of the F6. So look, I've probably exhausted my welcome. I've dealt with Kurnell. I think I might leave. I've probably taken more than 15 minutes, so I'll finish there, and Eleni and Lee can mop up the damage and deal with other issues. Thanks very much.